want to have your presentation on the WebAid site, you can use the innovation at EcoHealth.net to confirm that you would like your presentation uploaded. That's going to be the easiest way for us to be sure that you've consented to sharing your work in that forum. So jot down that email address and send Maya a note, and we'll make sure that your work's shared in that way. So, it is now my very great pleasure to begin our session on EcoHealth perspectives from Indigenous, tribal and ethnic communities. This is a very important session in the program, and I'm very pleased that to begin our session we will be greeted again by a colleague who has already shared with us today but is going to start this session for us. So Sue, if you come to introduce him.
So maybe I'll just briefly introduce again is Mr. GBR. I think you met him during the first day. And actually he's E-People's Pressed. And actually he's a 22nd generation of E-People Pressed in his area. Actually so he started to learn those, the E-culture and the language since 7 years old. And today, actually right now, he's going to sing 2 songs. Firstly, it's about how people respect the nature and how they conserve the environment and how they prevent the disasters. Second song is about how they guide the E-people spirit back to their hometown and ancestor. Please welcome him and give us the 2 songs.
Nim to be got zhtis no kama. 예시가 시다마 예 다가샤 예심을 츠 다가샤 예시도 츠 다가샤 예불라로 질 하버 그아샤 예밀로마 그아샤 예그조 지고바 예할레늘 부타샤 무세 부타샤 니를 하고 그타샤 예비를 하고 그타샤 예늘참
This last plenary for today is, we hope, going to weave together some threads in some new ways around the themes of this conference. And we certainly, by beginning and hearing songs from somebody that has lived in an area for 22 generations, is something to ground us in terms of the processes of change that we are seeing in the landscapes around us, how that influences cultures, communities, ecosystems, health, and how the lessons from Indigenous peoples worldwide can inform our understanding of this field of eco-health and also be a part of how we see our futures unfolding together. We had 3 people on the panel with us today, and unfortunately our colleague from the Kunming Academy of Social Sciences was not able to join us. We've had bad luck with our colleagues from Kunming, but he does send us apologies, and we were very pleased to have our colleague to welcome us in this way with a song from these places. So we have 2 speakers today, and I hope a rich discussion afterwards. The 2 speakers are Dr. Kerry Arabina, who is the Director of Research at the School of Indigenous Health at Monash University in Australia, and Dr. Margot Greenwood, who is the Academic Director of the National Collaborating Centre for Aboriginal Health in Canada. I'll introduce them both a little bit more before they come up, but I must say that it's a great pleasure to have 2 colleagues who I have learnt so much from over the last decade, and who have been really informing my work currently in northern British Columbia and Canada. So let me begin by asking my colleague Kerry Arabina to join us. Kerry was somebody that inspired me as I was transitioning into my new roles in Canada, moving from New Zealand through Hawaii to Canada. And Kerry's work has informed a great deal about what's unfolding with Indigenous issues in Australia. I strongly encourage you to read her impressive bio, which I'm not going to read for you, but to take stock of the kinds of another stock of talent that's coming to contribute. Kerry, thank you very much for being with us today.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, fellow speakers. As is our custom, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners of the country on which we're speaking today and extend the same respect to all of your families and all of our collective ancestors. This session has asked us to provide a perspective on eco-health, and so I thought I might take 15 minutes of all of our lives to describe that to you. It's these kinds of gatherings that invoke in all of us the right and the responsibility of upholding the foundational principles of democracy in its broadest sense, to respond to a deeply felt democratic innovation, to respond to the earth and all of its inhabitants in ways that not only support our inventiveness as humans, but support the future of all beings that call this place home. This eco-health community calls for nothing less than greatness, for all of us to be bigger than all of our individual ambitions, And we know that great things happen when a populace is moved to do something great, to change the course of history, to hold true to the principles of democracy and recognise both equality and diversity. EcoHealth, our community, has a chance to really take hold of these broad democratic principles through the process of change that we humans can and must undertake. And now is the time to speak of these things. We have more resources, better education, technological advancements. We have a diversity of experiences with which to enrich our lives and identities. And if these things offer hope, so does the fact that humans are now better informed, more capable of manifesting large-scale achievements. They're more knowledgeable about the injustices that has been done and more able to realise our dreams and aspirations than any generation before. We are concerned with the present and the future, and we believe our leadership needs to be future-focused. And we, in EcoHealth, have to position ourselves to co-create with others the desire, the belief and the pathway to move our leadership and our populace in the same direction. Therefore, EcoHealth can be nothing but a people's movement that not only addresses issues of sustainability, but also that of exclusion. EcoHealth can and must increase the self-worth of citizens, advocate for reconciled nations, and assert the rights and responsibilities for ecosystems to take care of us as we must care for them. And this is an active, not a passive, people's movement. EcoHealth's contribution cannot be underestimated because through our collective thoughts and actions, we make it possible to move on to shared futures as citizens of one united world, in which our futures are inescapably intertwined, and we understand at a fundamental level that we are one people. We need to appeal to our common humanity, listen to and respond from the depth of our own inner experience, to invoke a deep respect for individual preciousness. For I have to believe that among humans, love is often the first and the most appropriate response to the preciousness of others. We need discourses that are true for all cultures, not by attempting to identify moral principles that we might agree or commit to. Rather, we should take the point that some conclusions are just not acceptable. They violate a consensus as to what can even be contemplated as true. We need to agree about what is unacceptable to us all, and then through our collective endeavours, not let it happen. Understanding the preciousness of any life, hearing and listening to the truth, being accountable through justice, and practicing mercy may be what is required to set the foundations for a peaceful world. EcoHealth has its part to play. We will and have to make a case for peace. This is a deeply challenging component of our campaign because in order to make the case for peace, we also have to find the truth of peace. This is different to asserting what is true for you and I. We have to find a truth outside of ourselves and commit to it 100%. Make no mistake, truth has some unbearable elements, though without it we cannot find peace. And truth in its fullness has to be told, heard and respected. Some of us have been witness to that and know that in times of conflict, when the truth is found, it sets people free. There is only one truth about the state of our world. It is experienced differently. The truth resides in all of us. The truth is not ours to own. The truth can only come when the search for truth is genuine and authentic, when each person shares with others what they know of the truth. And so, into dialogue, we must go. There have been many attempts at having a dialogue about the truth, and those who've been able to stay in this dialogue then have sought the next step of the journey to peace, which is to embody justice. To take up the task of justice is to make sure that something is done to restore the damage that has been done, restore relationships and be concerned with accountability. That is, to realise the preciousness of our diverse cultures, make an effort to restore relationships, and be accountable to the principle of equality and of diversity. For we are diverse peoples from diverse cultures. We are different and we are equal. And any social, scientific, political, or any instrument used to undermine that equality needs to be eradicated, lest it degrades and humiliates us all. The purpose of EcoHealth Justice, then, is to bring loving action and accountability to the words, I and you are human. Then it will be acts of mercy that will create for us the new beginning, a healed relationship between humans with beings who share our ecosystems, and all of us with our ecosystems, a fully unified and reconciled world. To be merciful on the road to a peaceful, reconciled and unified world is to know the frailty of the human condition, and because of this, stand beside each other with acceptance, compassion and support. Acts of mercy are reciprocal acts of peacemaking in which forgiveness is possible. The combination then of truth, justice and mercy will see us on the road to reconciliation, which is only possible to the degree that each person sees the place and need for each other. It is the Anthropocene after all. We need EcoHealth to be a person-to-person campaign, and the campaign needs time to grow, evolve, to startle, to educate and revolutionise systems intent on stifling creativity, individuality and imagination. Nation-building projects are powerful vehicles for EcoHealth activities. Nation-building provides forums for people to re-evaluate their views and gain insight into themselves, and these projects provide personal connections through friendships or cooperation. We are here, we are now. These are our nations to build and our story to make. In this context then, nation building and the resultant story would need to incorporate our EcoHealth leadership and influence. The consequence of not doing that would be dire, because the public discourses on nation building would take on very different connotations if EcoHealth was at its centre. And this is the direction that I'm committed to taking EcoHealth in, as I feel it strongly synthesises with my own. First Peoples in Australia, in my experience, are not afraid of diversity or a divergence of views. We have national agencies capable of harnessing the collective views of Indigenous peoples and have experience of framing national discourses that are both traditional and innovative, collaborative, entrepreneurial and visionary. The way in which these discourses are developed could see EcoHealth principles embedded as necessary components of our nation-building enterprise. Leadership from within the EcoHealth collectives has always contributed to something bigger than the sum of our ambition, bigger than the differences of birth, community or faction, as does mine. And in Australia, we do this in very surprising ways. Whilst the pervasive discourse about Indigenous people in Australia is about disadvantage and dispossession born out of colonisation, we do have reason to celebrate. Among our number now are people representing us locally, nationally and internationally. We work in academia, natural resource management, in regional autonomy, youth empowerment, media marketing and public policy, land purchasing, business development, economic development, human rights and political strategy. We are strategists first and foremost. We construct futures when none were given to us. We are at the forefront of nation-building exercises in our country. But what excites me the most about this is that most of us know and hold close the concepts of care for country, of collectivism, rights and responsibilities. We have a high civic knowledge about EcoHealth issues, and we are taking this knowledge into professional, national and international arenas. We are already EcoHealth activists, as are you. We are an untapped resource, and you could be ours. We just need to make the connection, imagine where we want to go, then go there. I hold a view that EcoHealth is well positioned to, and therefore must, inform nation-building exercises around the globe through building civic knowledge, contributing to dialogue and resource reform, influencing citizenship, democracy, and reconciliation on a grander scale. From these exercises might come new eco-health discourses that are drawn to peace, allow us our individual life patterns, consolidate our responsibilities, and provide opportunities in which we can contribute to our respective societies in ways that are richly diverse. We cannot doubt for one moment that we've been given the intellectual vision, the spiritual insight, and even the physical resources we need for transitioning our mindsets, our language, and our views of each other, and who we can be together that is demanded of in these times. In the end, then, what is called for is nothing more and nothing less than what all the world's great religions demand, that we do unto others as we would have them do unto us. Let us be our brother's keeper. Let us be our sister's keeper. Let us find that common stake that we all have in one another, and let our politics reflect that spirit as well. For it's no longer enough to get health care to the sick, or jobs to the jobless, or education to our children. But that is where we start. When we can greet each other as equals, when we are celebrated for all that we do to enrich the health and well-being of our peoples, our animals, our ecosystems and our nations, then invest in a future for all of our children on terms that are celebrated in foundational documents of our countries. This is when the perfection begins and where our union grows stronger. This is how we build a planet, 7 billion stories and counting. We have it within our power to shape history, and I hope to do this through nation-building exercises, through which I can embed the principles and purpose of eco-health into our citizenry and draw on the capacity of First Peoples to innovate our nation through collective and earth-centred means. It is required of all of us here today to be mindful of how our own language either reproduces the dominant, tired, anti-vision discourses or engages with the new paradigms of leadership, community, and identity. For we all here today are people of action and innovation, forever pushing the boundaries of what's possible. Thank you very much for listening.
So with Kerry's words of leadership and innovation and community carrying with us, I really encourage you, as we said with this session, we're hoping to weave threads through earlier sessions to ask you to think in new ways about some of the EcoHealth experiences and insights you've been learning. And Kerry has challenged us to think in new ways of where Indigenous and other knowledges can fuel and challenge and inform the kind of work we do in this area, especially as it's engaging with landscapes and communities and long histories in any of those places. So thank you very much, Kerry. In particular, I think it's something that many of our speakers have crossed so many different contexts in their working lives and have transitioned from health, social, environmental contexts. And if you read Kerry's bio, you'll see that what we're experiencing is these ideas of synthesis, these ideas of collective learning that weave all the way through from Val's talk yesterday. So thank you very much, Kerry. And it's a pleasure now to invite Dr. Margot Greenwood to come up onto the stage. Margot is, as I mentioned, the Academic Director of the National Collaborating Centre for Aboriginal Health. This centre is based at the University of Northern British Columbia, where I've worked for the last few years. But Margot's centre is very much a national centre, and she will give you some of that context. But like Kerry, as Kerry has been recognised nationally in Australia, so too has Margot received a number of awards for her extensive work, and I'm really looking forward to hearing her additional insights. Thanks.
français. Ni hao. The only Chinese word I know. Good afternoon, distinguished guests and colleagues. I want to begin this afternoon by acknowledging the ancestors and peoples of these lands and thank them for allowing me to be here to participate in this important conference, and particularly in a number of conversations and dialogues that I've been able to have whilst here. I also want to thank the organizers for inviting me and giving me this opportunity. And I do want to extend my our host well wishes on a speedy recovery. I met and presented with Zhen Chu, and in Canada I identify as a Cree Indigenous person whose roots, my roots, are in the Central Plains, the Great Plains of Canada. And I'll show you some maps in a few minutes and you will see where that is. I spent a lot of years in university and I find myself still there. I wanted to retire my backpack that I thought I carried around in high school and junior high and university. I thought one day I'm going to retire this thing. Well, I haven't retired it yet. I'm still carrying it around. At the same time that I was going to university and I was doing my graduate work, and as I reflect back on it throughout most of my life, I've also had the opportunity to be taught by elders from my own community. And so I often think, one of my friends said to me once, I wonder, you know, we spend over 20 years in schools and universities in our country. I wonder how many people would come and spend 20 years in our communities to learn our knowledges and our ways. And that resonates with me, and I think about that because I stand before you not as a product of one system of knowledge, not as a product of a Western university where I went, but as a product of my community as well. And it's from that background that I listen when I come to venues like this, that I listen and that I process. And I'm grateful. I'm grateful for that life of privilege, because when I think about back home in my communities, how many people in my community do not have the opportunities I do? They would only dream of ever being able to come to China. And most will never be able to come here. So I am always aware of the privilege that I have, and I'm grateful for that. It's also from here that as I've spent the last 2 days with you in various workshops and plenary sessions, that I've heard the threads of principles of EcoHealth that I hope to draw out in my presentation in the next few slides. And in that, I want to share with you the work that I do in Canada and how some of those principles resonate in that work. So my talk for the next few minutes focuses on the National Collaborating Centre for Aboriginal Health. And that's a centre for Indigenous people in all of Canada. The centre is funded by the federal government, by the Public Health Agency of Canada. And it's in its development, the development of its structure and the work that we do, we seek to realize the philosophies and values, many of which I've heard here, but philosophies and values of our people, of our Indigenous people in Canada, at the same time as we strive to meet the accountability requirements of federal funding. So you can well imagine the push and pull sometimes of that reality. But before I begin, I want to show you just a couple of maps of who the people, Aboriginal or Indigenous people of Canada are. So here we have a map. This is a map of First Nations people. So let me explain that first. In Canada, we have 3 culturally recognized groups: First Nations, And many of may have heard the term Native American Indian or Indians. We call them, we are First Nations in our country. The second group is Inuit, and the third is Métis peoples. So those three groups constitute Aboriginal peoples in Canada, and they are recognized by the Canadian Constitution. There are Aboriginal people in Canada, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people make up approximately 4% of our population. It's a fast-growing population and a young population. The map that you have in front of you, and really I just wanted to show you this map quickly so that you could see where some of the First Nations people reside across the country. And most of our First Nations people live on small land tracts, reservations, but the majority of our people today don't live on those reservations, but rather have migrated and live in more urban settings for the most part, and that's First Nations. The second group is the Inuit peoples of Canada, and you would have heard Dr. Laurie Chan speak of those people this morning, and I was in one of the sessions where one of our other presenters spoke of Inuit people, and here you can see that they reside in 4 regions. And there's approximately just over 50,000 Inuit people in Canada. And the majority of Inuit people, though, around 75 to 80%, still reside in these 4 regions. The Métis people of Canada are spread out, but they primarily reside in those middle provinces, the middle part of the map of Canada. That's where the plains of Canada are as well, and that's where I come from. I'm a Plains Cree. But they live primarily there, and some in Ontario. So now I want to switch, so now that you have a sense of when I'm talking about First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people, you'll know who I'm talking about or where they reside. I'm going to talk a bit about who is the National Collaborating Centre for Aboriginal Health. I'm not going to read out this slide to you, but I do want to focus on the guiding principles. This center was developed under the direction of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples across Canada. We had a large gathering, we came together, and we basically had 2 questions. How do we want to govern ourselves, and what do we want to work on? So we had the people from the communities tell us that. That's a very, very important thing, especially in any of the work that we do. Is that whole notion of inclusivity, right from the time of identifying an issue or a challenge to engaging in the solutions. The people whom we're seeking to serve need to be involved. They know what the challenges are in their communities. They also know the solutions. And so how is it that we come together to engage with them, to bring forward change, create that kind of change in people's lives? So we have the respect for diversity. I've heard that word used many, many times throughout this conference, respecting that diversity and welcoming and embracing that rather than being exclusionary. Supporting that inclusion and participation in whatever it is that we do, being mindful of who it is that we serve and what we are trying to achieve. Incorporating Indigenous knowledge. So there's the recognition of different systems of knowledge, different ways of knowing, different ways of being, and different ways of addressing issues and challenges that we face. Relevant and meaningful. At home in our country, we've heard many times from our people in the communities, why do the researchers come here? We see them for 6 months or maybe a year, and they're gone. And we never hear about them again. We've heard that so many times. So we wanted to make sure whatever the work that we do is informed by the people and that it is relevant and meaningful. Are we going to make a difference in the lives of individuals, of families, in their everyday life, in whatever it is that we are seeking to do? And of course, I've also heard these words, encouraging collaboration and capacity building. How do we bring the information to people? Because having information is empowering. And how is it that we share that information so that people can empower themselves? So those are the questions and principles that whatever work that we are doing, we ask of ourselves. Who do we serve? Not only those folks that you saw on the maps I shared with you, but we serve Indigenous and non-Indigenous frontline practitioners across sectors, across disciplines. Because when we're thinking about holistic health, or when I hear you talk about eco-health, we're not just talking about one discipline. We're talking about multiple disciplines, multiple sectors coming together. Okay, Margot's giving me the sign here. And so we serve policymakers, decision makers, researchers. How do we support them in the work that they're doing when they are engaging with Aboriginal people or Indigenous people in Canada? How do we create that platform of coming together? I just want to say one thing, and that is, I heard this many times, as particularly on the first day as I was listening to the speeches from many of you, and that was the whole notion of relationship. I don't think I have to go on and on about that, but it is such a fundamental and such an important thing. It's almost like sometimes we feel like we're screaming across a cultural divide. How is it that I learn about someone else? What are the protocols? How is it that I am in community? It's all of those fundamental questions around relationship that are really important, and I think sometimes we miss them. And most importantly is engaging with respect and equality when we come together. I think those are absolutely fundamental. In the Collaborating Center, we focus on 4 areas. We focus on child and youth health, social determinants, public health priorities, and Indigenous knowledge. And we use a variety of strategies. Our focus in this center is not on primary research, but on knowledge translation. And so we bring people together and we try to do, and it's evidence-based, we're in public health. So you can well imagine the challenges when there is no disaggregated data, or there is different knowledge systems and ways of doing things come together. So that's been a real challenge that we have faced in our development. I think that we've worked hard at doing a number of processes, but that would be a whole other presentation, so I'm not going to go down that path because Margot's going to give me the 2 minutes here in about 30 seconds, so I'm going to go to my last couple of slides. So this is just pictures of our children from the communities, and in these last 2 slides, I want to talk about the link between environment and people, and I listened to some very informative presentations this morning about that topic. And in the area of child development, we have spent considerable time exploring the development of children's identity and cultural continuity. I was particularly impressed with Professor Brown's comments around change and the welcoming of diversity and complexity. As I was listening to that, I was reminded of an elder teacher of mine. Her name was Mary Thomas, and she used to talk to, we used to spend many hours out on the land. And she, in her, near the end of her life, she said to me, Margot, the 2 most important things in life are the children and the environment. And she was invited to speak all over the world. And she said, I only want to talk about these things now. And I really took that to heart because in my work, that's primarily where I've spent my time too. And she taught me a lot about change and how she used to tell me stories, and Mary was about 85, 87 years old, and her grandmother and auntie lived till they were 103. She would take me on the land where these generations had been, and she would tell me stories, and as I stood with her, I realized that I was hearing stories that were over 200 years old, and even older than that because they had come from her grandmother. So it was right there to touch. Those generations that we heard this morning, 22 generations on the land, it was right there to touch. Our focus on child and youth comes from the communities and a context of inequitable realities that exist in our communities. And it's anchored in our philosophical beliefs about children. So for example, and you may have heard some of these, children are our future, and as such are future citizens of our nations. They are a meeting of the past, the present, and the future. All of that meets in our children. Children are at the heart of cultural continuity. What is it then that we pass on to future generations that will ensure cultural continuity? This is a complex question and a complex understanding and answer. I'm afraid that I have a whole lot more questions than I do answers. But I was thinking again of Professor Brown's words about as environments change, so do we change, and how we think and are in those environments. And so what are the elements of identity that are necessary to ensure cultural continuity? What are those elements that pass through time? What are those that change? All of these are necessary questions to ensure the well-being of humanity. Identity for many Indigenous peoples is anchored in spirituality and philosophically tied to the land. As we move more and more to urban settings, how does this environmental change impact our identities? What is it then that we retain in these changing realities? These are huge questions. They're complex questions, and there's no simple answers to them. I'm just, this black and white picture that you have in the bottom here, and Carrie mentioned it very briefly in her presentation as well. I come from a country where we experienced colonization for several hundred years. And I once asked one of my elder teachers, I said, how is it that you come to peace in this time when you've lived through so much change? When you experienced residential schools, experienced being taken from your families, and where it was really cultural genocide. He said to me, Margot, very simply, he said, I take what is good for our people, and I leave the rest behind. And in that, it is so simple, and yet so broad and so deep. Identity is both individual and collective, and so focusing on both the individual and the collective, is a way of addressing the challenges of identity. In my last slide, I show you some examples of how we've tried to, at the Collaborating Center, to look at questions of EcoHealth and the principles that I heard here, and to share that with our communities, and other ways of healing. So when we think about questions of cultural continuity and citizenship, we're thinking about self-determination as well, and being self-determining over our lives. And that's a healing process. It's part of healing, but it's also a part of living. One of the pieces that you see up here was EcoHealth and Aboriginal Health, and that's where we have Margot Parks write for us and bring together some of these principles that are in Aboriginal health, but also share with your environment of EcoHealth. So with that, I can go on and on. There are many, many more things. I invite you to go to our website. It's up here, www.nccah.ca, and also there's our email address if you would like more information on the National Collaborating Centre for Aboriginal Health. Miigwech, thank you.
So while you are, we're going to have about 10 minutes for questions, and as we will do the same as we have in the past. I think we need a third microphone somewhere that will be necessary. We'll need to have one over there, and there should hopefully be another one around somewhere. The idea with EcoHealth, as I've been observing in the parallel sessions, and also in the sessions, the panel session this morning, this theme of how it is that I learn about someone else, of how it is that we can listen and learn and find our path through our research processes, but also our change processes that is genuinely benefiting from the richness of knowledge that is out there. These are not simple challenges. And I think if we think back to the series of questions, the 6 questions, or the 7 questions that Val presented us, we've heard responses and prompts and reminders of the importance of those different kinds and layers of questions, all the way from biophysical thinking all the way down to reflective thinking. And as I was reflecting on hearing from these two, I did think about the role of EcoHealth as governance. This idea, if we think of governance, I'm not talking about government here, I'm talking about governance, and the idea of how we make important decisions, who we involve in making these decisions, and then how we hold these decision makers into account. And as researchers in EcoHealth, with both our research and action focus, we've heard a lot of good fuel for reminding us of important contributions to that governance. So with a couple of prompts like that, do we have any questions for Margot or Kerry? Yes, one up in the back, if you could take the microphone. Thanks, Sonia, and if you could just introduce yourself, please.
Thank you very much to both speakers. I'm Sonia Feb from Veterinarians Without Borders. I wanted to pose a question to Margot. You mentioned that your role is knowledge translation. So I wondered if you could expand on who you're trying to translate to and some of the tools and approaches you use.
Sorry, where was that young woman? Knowledge translation, and who are we translating knowledge to? Was that the question?
Yeah, who are you translating to, and what kind of approaches do you use when you are doing that?
We share knowledge from a number of fronts. So, for example, it depends on the audience. If we are producing products for community or information for community, it might be basic health information. So we will develop a number of different products. We've used a lot of social media. We've used a lot of DVDs, those kinds of things. We also use things like fact sheets that are short, snappy. Some are 2 pages, some are no longer than 4. So it depends on who the audience is. If we're doing presentations to chief medical health officers, then of course it's a different tactic and also different kind of information. We do very comprehensive reviews in
gathering information depending on what the topic is. Oftentimes we can't do full systematic reviews because, as I mentioned, there was very little disaggregated data when you're talking about First Nations, Inuit, or Métis people's health in Canada. And so what we try to do is comprehensive reviews, though we do have two processes. We have a double-blind peer review process on all products, as well as we have community review processes. I hope that answers it.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Oh, Kerry, please do. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Thanks.
It's really important about where in your research process research translation gets decided upon. Often what happens is we do research and then at the end of it we have evidence, and then we try and consider what kind of range of products we might roll it into so that we can use it in advocacy or information sharing or something. What we've started to do in Australia, particularly in working with our communities, is decide on the range of knowledge translation products up front, so that during the course of the research project you've got a chance to engage all those different stakeholders in the research process and have them involved in generating information to increase people's ownership and desire for it and then utilisation of it, because it seems to be more authentic in the way that people can engage with it.
Yeah, thanks, Kerry. Yes, a question up in the front here.
Thanks to both of you. My name is Jasmine Montescarville. I'm from the Australian National University. I was particularly inspired by the concept of nation building, Kerry. And I was just wondering if you have any examples from your experiences, which seem to be very broad, of how we can go about doing that.
All of our research needs to be designed towards achieving something both at a local level in a research context, but it absolutely has to make a contribution to our nationhood and what it means for people to live long, healthy, happy, prosperous lives in the context of the nations in which we live. And so in terms of EcoHealth, the focus I have really taken on is those broader democratic principles of earth justice or earth democracy. They fit very nicely with a whole range of earth-centred ideas and concepts that are held by communities that I live and belong to. And then we do political advocacy with it. So for example, one of my previous roles was to set up the National Congress of Australia's First Peoples, and that becomes now a vehicle for political representation. A lot of issues around negotiating resource management and natural resources with big corporate companies and mining companies and diversified community interests. We hold forums for that to happen. We design on research concepts, we move it through, but we actually really try and engender ways of building our nation. So that's just one little small, excuse me, small example, but I'm happy to talk about it more with you after.
We have a question from the WebAid participants. We have several people that have been online, and so Maya, please.
Thank you. So the question that's come from someone online is directed to both of you. And it starts, Dr. Arvina, thank you for your talk on the importance of love, justice, and democracy in the context of EcoHealth. And Dr. Greenwood for also giving voice to issues of cultural oppression. And given the limited freedom of speech in China, do you have any advice for those in China who struggle to bring justice to all Chinese citizens, including minorities such as Tibetans, who face discrimination? And they continue, I realize you're not from China and hence may feel in a poor position to answer this question, but on the other hand, an academic based in China may have even less capacity. I'm wondering if you could comment.
So, for the online person, you're right, it is very hard to be accountable to the justice that is required when we're doing these kinds of activities, particularly in the context of nation building. And it's a very underwhelming but overwhelming concept. And whilst it sits in our hearts, what we don't do is bring it out into our practice. And that is just loving action, being compassionate to people, to absolutely practice forgiveness through acts of mercy in some ways. Understanding that humans are fragile, that we have different and divergent views. It is not something that you can cultivate easily or quickly. It takes a long time to practice loving action towards each other as humans. But if we're looking towards unifying our world, and if we are looking to becoming one people of one planet, and that we are talking about reconciliation in those ways, then perhaps it can be as simple as walking down the street and smiling at someone, or hugging someone, which this community here seems to do a lot of. But bringing loving action into your academic work, it is difficult to be heartfelt, but not too difficult, I don't think.
So with those challenges, is there any more final questions? I think we're at the end of this session. We'll only have time for one more very quick question. Yeah, if you can get the microphone there.
I think this is an opportunity, and I hope it's not going to be lost. I think it's an opportunity not for just loving care, but for outrage. And the reason I say this is if we look at the statistics on the Native people's health, they're terrible. They're just awful. And in the United States, this is after 100 or more years of equal access to health care. Not good health care, better health care now than before, but we still have these terrible, terrible differentials. And that's why I'm saying outrage. Enough, enough. This has been going on too long. It's not a question other than saying, so, what are we going to do about it?
I've seen a lot of people live and die by that sword. I think it is really important to feel outrage, and please feel free to be morally outraged about what it is that is our experience as Indigenous peoples. That's true. But I think rather than me getting outraged and eating myself up on the inside and dying an early death because I'm too stressed to, because I carry anger with me as my sword, and not being taken seriously in a whole range of forums because that's what I'm talking through, I have found that it is probably better for entire populations of people to get consensus about what it is that violates all of us as citizens. What is it? And for me, genocide is something that is a violation and should never be allowed to happen, yet it is. There are so many things that we can get outraged by in the planet at the moment, and they are our individual perceptions to the truth of what is happening. What we do need to do is have more dialogues where we can engage with that truth in meaningful ways. I have spent at least a decade of my life being outraged, and it has done nothing. It has made me a very sad person. So I've tried to reconcile where I need to be peaceful, and if I want to be peace, and if that's my long-term aspiration and goal, that is much more of a warrior's action than being angry.
I just wanted to add a couple of comments. First of all, I spoke earlier in my presentation about being in a place of privilege. It is also a place of responsibility. When I'm, as an academic in the academy, I carry the responsibility of my people with me, and that is to take a leadership role at times when it's necessary, particularly when it impacts our lives. So when opportunities like the National Collaborating Centre for Aboriginal Health came along, we took it. We were strategic, and we never let the struggle or the argument die. Do we get angry all the time? Sure, we're probably angry. But is that the best way to make change? And I think Carrie just spoke to that. And so we need to think about that. There is a time when we need to just say it straight out and not mince any words, just lay it down. And there's a time for gentleness. And there's a time for us to work together. And if my elder teacher was standing here beside me today, she would be encouraging me to walk my principles. And those principles are strong, they're true, and they're resilient. And so there is a time to take our own voice, and there is a time to be gentle.
Well, thank you both very much. You have, as we hoped, woven together and brought out some very important themes for this conference of change and justice and the work that is both personal and collective that we all need to do. So thank you both very much. And given that we have brought up the themes of governance, it is in a moment my task to bring up and transition into the roles that our association is taking very small steps to try to envision what our collective self is beyond individual researchers, and also to, in the form of our association, and also before we move on to those particularities of our association and our BGM, I'm going to ask Pierre Horwitz to come up and give us an update on the conference statement, where that's got to. And I would like you all to start considering, and as we move from this session, what we're going to be doing is expressing, those people that are members of our association are going to be expressing in a tiny way this strange democratic act of voting. So I will be giving you some more information about that as we leave this session. But Pierre, I'll let you start off and I'll pull it up.
Thanks, Margot. So again, we've had a very active group of people involved. And this will take hopefully 2 minutes. I'm going to be very quick. This version is currently being worked on, and we can't see it there. So I think the most important thing that I can say is that the purpose has been clarified and the target audience has been clarified. The target audience is ourselves as the EcoHealth community. What can we do? How do we engage with the Millennium Development Goals? Are we already doing it? Of course we are. We're already doing it in more ways than one. So the target audience is, so we're writing this for ourselves. And then the second thing that's important is that we're giving it to the board, and we're charging the board with the responsibility of doing what it needs to do with this document, this 2-page document, whether it needs to transfer it or translate it for some sort of policy initiative. So, having said all of that, Margot, if you just go, that's the version, that's the clean version. Just go to the other one. So I just want to show you the nature of the other version, and you'll just see a pile of red, and this is, if you just scroll down through it, Margot, just to give people a sense that things are really moving around in terms of the text that we presented to you on the first day. It's changing quite significantly. We've restructured this document for it to flow much better. It's got a clear narrative in it, we think, and there are people working on it as we speak, so that we're able to come up with a new version tomorrow morning. Then we'll meet again on lunchtime tomorrow, and our intention is to bring something back on the plenary, tomorrow, something that everybody can have a look at. There'll be a version that'll be uploaded at sometime between 10 and 11 tonight.
Thank you, Pierre.
Is there any?
Yeah, are there any questions?
Does anybody, or people who have been working with it, want to add anything?
Okay, so it is my pleasure to call today's official, the conference proceedings to a close, and to thank you all. But what I'd like to do also is to remind you that those of you who are members and would like to vote in the election, the time is now to complete that process if you've not done it already. And the information is all at the booth, So please look into that. And for those of you that are interested, the BGM will start here in approximately 10 or 15 minutes. So please, if you've already voted, you can just stay here, and if you haven't, finish your voting and we'll be kicking off very shortly.